You think he knows we're real? Mannequin challenge.
Okay, so Alaska, California, and most other eastern and central states. These are all places in the U.S. in which foxes were brought over from Europe. These foxes were brought over for fur farming and for fox hunting. By looking at these foxes, we can see the impact in the U.S. that these foxes had on ecosystems and how these animals' behaviors were changed from being put into a new area. Even though this did not happen near us specifically, it's still relevant to look at to see how ecosystems will change from new animals being introduced into them, as well as seeing how these animals change from being put into a new environment. While red foxes are native to some parts of the U.S., these foxes that were introduced to California and surrounding areas have had noticed behavioral differences than native foxes. They seem to thrive more in urban areas than foxes in the U.S. did, and this is just one minor detail to be mentioned when talking about foxes that were introduced here from Europe. In order to see how some foxes and the ecosystems that they reside in have changed, you must first see how the foxes were introduced in America by Europeans. And foxes occupy the widest geographical range of all carnivores, says the article Introduction and Range Expansion of Non-Native Foxes in California. The main cause of this is from European colonists bringing over foxes for fur farming and for hunting. In areas in the U.S., foxes were taken and released. In areas of the U.S. that foxes were taken to and released include California, Idaho, the eastern coast, Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. The previous mentioned article also states one of the main ways foxes were taken to California was via the Transcontinental Railroad in the mid-1860s from the Midwest. In these places, foxes were taken for fur farms and to be hunted, but naturally some escaped and mixed with the already population that was there in the U.S. In addition to the foxes that were brought over by Europeans, there were other causes to increase numbers of foxes. The foxwebsite.net says that several unpublished studies suggest that the post-European expansion of red foxes was due to the southward movement of foxes from Canada. This was caused by the clearing of land for agriculture, as well as changes in the predator community. Because of this contribution to the population of inland foxes from Europe is actually minimal. Most were already here or came from Canada. However, the foxes that came from Europe showed some behavioral physical distinctions from the foxes native to America. Differences in the European foxes and American foxes. Like previously stated in the beginning of this, some authors believe non-native foxes in America are better adapted to live in urban areas. Once humans came and disturbed certain areas, the foxes were looking for new places to live and found still open plains in these urban areas. People fed them, as well as there were reduced amounts of predators to them there. There were no coyotes or anything, so they were able to thrive in these urban areas, while foxes that were native to the U.S. already had homes and areas they had made dens, so they did not adapt to these urban areas as well. In the introduction and range expansion of non-native foxes in California, they say the reasons that these foxes had adapted to these new places were because of that. Native foxes in America tend to be lighter than European foxes and have a larger sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism is when males tend to be larger than females, so the native foxes in America, that distinction was larger than these European foxes that they brought. Because of these factors, it has led some authors to think that the American and European foxes are actually different subclasses of foxes. So through these non-native foxes, we see what happens when a group of animals is taken out of its natural habitat and placed into new areas. These foxes that were brought to the U.S. had little impact on ecosystems since there were already foxes in America. They did not upset the balances a great deal, and we see how the non-native foxes, some developed differences in their native counterparts in their behaviors due to the areas in which they were released. We see how foxes were brought in by Europeans and released in areas where there were little to no native foxes, and how these foxes mixed with the native foxes. Yet there are still different ways that they were developed behaviorally and physically. So even though there were no drastic changes from this introduction of foxes in the U.S., we see that there were some changes in the behaviors in some of these foxes and the ecosystems that were released. This helps us to learn that as people we need to be careful when messing with animals and moving them, that we do not create drastic changes to the environment and ecosystems that surround us. Thank you.
Okay, about... And that way I can say what I'm going to say.